Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be talking about how our brains really work.
Really?
Yeah. We've got this super interesting article called Important Brain Networks. And
Okay.
you know how we all kind of learned about like different brain regions?
Yeah.
Well, this goes way beyond that.
Oh, cool.
Like it gets into the nitty-gritty of how these things are all connected and why that matters.
So instead of thinking of the brain as like all these separate parts, we're looking at it as this
Mhm.
incredibly complex network,
Yeah,
like a highway system, but for our thoughts and feelings.
I like that.
Yeah. And that's actually called the connectome. And
Mhm.
looking at the connectome is really changing how we understand how our brains work.
Okay, so that highway analogy, that's super helpful for me to kind of picture it.
Yeah.
But the article mentions like 7 major networks within this connectome.
Right.
Are we really going to try and get through all of those?
We are. And the article actually gives them these like nicknames,
Yeah.
makes it way easier to remember.
Yeah, that's great.
So let's start with the networks that deal with how we experience the world around us.
Okay, yeah.
First up is the sensoromotor network, or the transducer, as the article calls it.
Okay.
So this network is basically how we interact with the physical world,
Hmm.
feeling sensations, hearing sounds, and even coordinating movements.
Okay, so like if I reach for my coffee cup, my sensor-motor network's making sure I don't like spill it everywhere.
Exactly. It's constantly processing sensory input and coordinating your actions. Super important.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty essential.
Yeah.
But what about when we're not like focused on the outside world?
Okay.
When we're just daydreaming? What's going on then?
Well, then the default mode network, or the internal mind, is taking over.
Okay.
It's active when we're kind of just, lost in thought, daydreaming.
You mean when you zone out and you realize you haven't heard like a word anyone said?
Yeah, yeah,
Happens to the best of us.
totally. But it's not just zoning out. The default mode network is also really important for like creativity and
Right.
self-reflection.
So it's not necessarily a bad thing to let your mind wander?
Not at all. It's all about balance, right?
Yeah.
We need both that focused attention from the sensoromotor network
Right.
and the kind of free-flowing thought of the default mode network.
Makes sense. So there's got to be something that decides like which network takes the lead, right?
Right.
Because I can't be daydreaming when I'm driving, obviously.
Exactly. And that's where the salience network comes in.
Okay.
Or the moderator, as the article calls it. It's like the control tower of the brain,
Mm.
always monitoring what's going on both internally and externally.
So it's deciding if I need to like focus on the road or if it's okay to think about what I'm making for dinner.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. The salience network helps us switch between tasks, filter out distractions.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But how does it decide what's salient, like what's important enough to pay attention to?
Ooh, that's a great question. It actually receives input from all the other networks,
Oh,
including the limbic system, which we'll talk about more in a bit.
okay.
This means our emotions, our past experiences, even our subconscious biases can all play a role in shaping what the salience network focuses on.
So it's like our brains are constantly filtering information and making decisions about what we focus on, and we're not even aware of it.
Exactly. And this really shows how complex and efficient the brain is. Always adapting, always responding to the world around it.
This is already so mind-blowing. So we've got what? The sensor-motor network for interacting with the world,
Yep.
the default mode network for internal thoughts,
Uh-huh.
and the salience network for directing our attention.
Right.
Okay, what other networks are part of this whole brain symphony going on?
Well, let's talk about the limbic system next, which the article calls the regulator.
Okay.
This network is all about emotions, motivation, and memory. It's why you feel happy when you achieve a goal, get that adrenaline rush when you face a challenge, and even remember that embarrassing moment from middle school you wish you could forget.
Okay, so the limbic system is why I still cringe when I think about that time I tripped and fell in front of everyone at the school dance.
Exactly. And it's also why, like, certain smells or songs can bring back such vivid memories.
Yeah.
The limbic system is so closely tied to our personal experiences, it really shapes who we are.
Sounds like it has a pretty big job. Managing our emotions, driving our motivations, and storing all our memories. How does it handle all of that?
Well, the limbic system is complicated, has a lot of interconnected structures, but
Yeah.
one to remember is the amygdala.
Okay.
It's like the emotional alarm system.
Okay.
Detects threats, triggers our fight or flight response.
So when I see a spider and totally freak out, that's my amygdala sending out an SOS.
Exactly. We might not face life or death situations every day, but the amygdala is always looking out for things that trigger those strong emotional responses.
Wow. Okay. This is all starting to make so much sense. So we've got networks for sensing, moving, thinking, feeling, directing our attention. What else is there?
Well, we've got two more major networks to cover. One's all about laser focus, and the other is dedicated to processing what we see.
Okay.
But maybe we should take a break here and let all this sink in for a minute.
Good idea. I know my brain feels like it just ran a marathon. Amazing to think about all this happening in our brains constantly without us even realizing it.
It is amazing.
Okay, I think my brain's caught its breath. Ready for those last two networks? You said one was all about focus?
Yeah, the dorsal attention network, or the aperture,
The aperture, okay.
helps you stay focused on a task even when there are distractions all around.
So that's what helps me tune out the, construction going on outside when I'm trying to work.
Exactly. It filters out all that extra information and lets you zero in on what's important.
We could all use a good, strong dorsal attention network these days.
Right. There are just so many distractions. And it's amazing how this network works with the salience network, you know?
Yeah.
Like the salience network might flag something as important, but then the dorsal attention network's like, nope, not important right now.
It's like this constant battle between what grabs our attention and what we actually need to focus on.
Yeah, and being able to control our attention, that's key for so much. Learning, productivity, decision-making, even our well-being.
This makes me think about when I'm trying to be present with my family, but my mind keeps wandering to my to-do list.
Hmm.
Is that a sign that, my dorsal attention network isn't strong enough?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's normal for our minds to wander, right? And sometimes those thoughts are important too.
Yeah.
The trick is to be aware of where your attention is going and then gently bring it back to the present moment. It's like training a muscle. The more you practice focusing, the better you get at it.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got networks for sensing, moving, thinking, feeling, directing attention,
Yeah.
and now focusing. What's that last major network?
The visual system, or the observer. It's all about processing what we see.
Okay.
Sounds simple, but it's incredibly complex. So many different areas have to work together to take all that visual information and make sense of it.
Wow, I'm realizing even the simplest things our brains do are so complex.
Yeah, and we're just scratching the surface here.
Right.
We're talking about billions of neurons communicating with each other.
So we've got those 7 major networks,
Right.
but then the article also mentioned something called subnetworks. What are those?
Oh, it's like zooming in on a map. You go from continents to countries.
Okay.
Within each of those big networks, there are these specialized circuits, and they're responsible for very specific functions.
Mm.
So for example, within the language network, there are subnetworks for understanding speech, producing speech, reading, and writing.
Wow, so it's not just one big massive activity, it's like this super organized system.
Exactly. And all these subnetworks, they allow for incredible flexibility and adaptability. We can seamlessly integrate information from our senses, switch between tasks, learn new skills.
It's like our brains are constantly rewiring themselves based on our experiences.
Exactly. And that brings us to this really important idea, neuroplasticity.
Okay.
It means our brains aren't fixed. They can change and adapt over time.
So if I spend time learning new language, the networks involved in that actually get stronger.
Exactly. Just like exercising a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Same with our brains.
That's so cool. It means we have way more control over our brain power than we think.
We do. But what happens when these networks aren't working as well as they could? The article mentioned that imbalances in network activity can lead to mental health issues.
Oh, right.
That's a really important point. When we talk about things like anxiety or depression or even PTSD, we're often talking about problems with how these networks communicate with each other.
So instead of just thinking about chemical imbalances, we can also look at these as network imbalances.
Exactly. And that changes how we think about treatment and support.
Yeah.
For example, therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness, they can help people learn to regulate their emotions and strengthen those connections within the networks.
That makes sense. It's like we're learning to rewire our brains to feel better.
Exactly. And the more we understand these networks, the more targeted and effective our treatments can be. But it's important to remember mental health is complex, and there's a lot more to it than just brain networks.
Of course.
Yeah.
But it's still empowering to know we have the potential to influence our own brain health.
Definitely. And this understanding can also help us create healthier lifestyles, environments that support healthy brain development and function.
Okay, so we've covered the 7 major networks, subnetworks, neuroplasticity. How does all of this actually apply to our everyday lives? What are some things our listeners can take away from this?
Well, I think one big takeaway is self-awareness. Understanding that our thoughts, feelings, behaviors are all rooted in these complex systems can help us be more compassionate and understanding with ourselves.
So instead of beating ourselves up for having a bad day or not being able to focus, we can remember that our brains are doing their best.
Exactly. And that understanding can also help us make better choices for our well-being. Like, if we know stress can disrupt the balance of our networks, we can make time for things that help us relax,
Hmm.
like spending time in nature, practicing mindfulness, maybe doing something creative.
It's like we're getting a user manual for our own minds.
Right. If we understand what influences these networks, we can be proactive about keeping them healthy. And you know what else? This knowledge can even help us improve our relationships with others.
Oh, how so?
When we realize everyone's brain is unique, everyone has their own strengths and challenges, we can be more empathetic and patient.
So instead of getting frustrated when someone doesn't see things our way,
Mm.
we can try to understand their perspective based on how their brain works.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the diversity of human experience.
Yeah.
Our brains are wired differently. We perceive and respond to the world in different ways. And that can actually lead to more compassionate and fulfilling relationships.
This has been incredible. I feel like we've learned so much about how our brains work, but it's just the tip of the iceberg.
It really is. Brain network research is constantly evolving, new discoveries all the time. It's really exciting.
So where can our listeners go to keep learning about this?
Well, the article we talked about today is a great place to start.
Okay.
It has a clear overview of the 7 major networks and even links to other resources.
Perfect. I'll definitely be checking those out. This has been so fascinating, and I feel like I have this whole new appreciation for just how incredible our brains are.
They are remarkable, aren't they? And the more we learn, the more we realize how much power we have to shape our own minds and lives.
That's a great point. Okay, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. Okay, I need a minute to process all this.
Yeah.
Brain networks, so much going on we don't even realize.
Right. Makes you think how much of our decisions and reactions, even our personality, is shaped by this stuff we're not even aware of.
Yeah, exactly. Like what if my salience network is, I don't know, more sensitive to certain things?
Uh-huh.
Could that be why I get stressed out more easily?
It's possible. It's like understanding these networks helps us understand ourselves better.
Yeah.
Not saying it's all about our brain wiring, but it does give us a new perspective on why we act the way we do.
But if we know that, maybe we can make different choices, right? Like if my dorsal attention network is,
Yeah,
easily distracted, maybe I need a really quiet workspace to get anything done.
exactly. And that's where neuroplasticity is so important. We're not stuck with the brains we were born with, right?
Right.
We can train our brains to be more focused, more resilient.
So we're like the conductors of our own brain symphony.
I like that.
We can't control every instrument, but we can learn to make them work together.
Yeah, to create a more balanced, fulfilling experience.
Exactly. Okay, before we wrap up, what's like the one thing you want our listeners to remember about all this?
I think the biggest thing is that our brains aren't static. They're dynamic, interconnected systems, always adapting.
Mm-hmm.
We're not just a product of our genes or our environment. We have the power to shape our own brains through our experiences, our choices, even our thoughts.
That is so cool. Like we have the keys to our own mental control panel. We just got to learn how to use them.
Exactly. And the more we learn about these networks, the more we realize what we're capable of.
Well, I'm definitely leaving this deep dive feeling inspired to learn more about my own brain. This has been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all this with us.
My pleasure. And remember, this is just the beginning. The brain is a mystery we're still unraveling, so stay curious.
Great advice. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the amazing world of brain networks. We hope you learned something new and that you'll keep exploring the incredible power of your own mind. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.